Hi everyone. In this lecture we're going to talk about ethical issues in both academia and during scientific research.
So we're going to discuss the areas of scientific misconduct. There's three really big ones: data fabrication, data falsification, and plagiarism. These are often referred to as FFP. Fabrication is when you actually create data. So let's think about, we make up the data points. We're in the lab, we don't even run the tests, we just make a bunch of data points that look like what we want them to look like and show what we want them to show. That's data fabrication. Data falsification is a little different than data fabrication. You might actually have the points. So you ran your tests, you got some points, but maybe there's some outliers in that data. So these 2 points don't fit my curve, so I remove them. And I just analyze the points that fit my curve, and this strengthens my hypothesis. This is data falsification. Probably the area of scientific misconduct that you've heard of before or most familiar with is plagiarism. Plagiarism is stealing other people's work and passing it off as your own. There are different types of plagiarism, and so we'll go into more detail in 5 different types of plagiarism later on in this lecture.
Okay, another area of scientific misconduct is looking at issues regarding publishing and authorship. Publishing is extremely important in scientific research. Where you publish and how many articles you publish will affect your reputation. It affects your tenure and promotion chances. It can affect getting grants. And authorship refers to both the order of authors and who is put on as an author on a paper. So of course, if you want to have a large number of scientific articles, you're going to want to be an author on as many articles as possible. And you also want to be as high up in the list of authors as you can. So the first author is considered the authoritative author or the most important author on an article. But especially in some of the physical sciences and other disciplines, there's large groups now where there can be several hundred authors. All right, another area of scientific concern that you've probably heard of is that there are guidelines that you have to follow when you're doing research on either human or animal subjects. If you're doing a study that involves humans, if you're just doing something very simple like doing a survey, you have to fill out a form describing your study and submit it to your institutional review board, also known as an IRB, and you have to have your study approved to go ahead and do your research. If you're doing research that involves animal subjects, you have to go through, the acronym is IACUC, the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. So that's another form that has to be approved to make sure that you're doing research in an ethical manner. Okay, another area that you have to be concerned with is that if there are conflicts of interest. And for example, you might think of this if a researcher is doing work on looking at medicine, drugs, and there might be a conflict of interest if, say, they're being funded by a pharmaceutical company. And are they doing work in an objective manner, or are they being influenced in any way? Data interpretation is another area of potential scientific misconduct. It's similar to fabrication and falsification in that it deals with data, but in this you're deliberately interpreting data in a way that fits in with your research agenda. So you're not looking necessarily at data objectively, but you have perhaps a point that you want to make, and you skew your results to show whatever you want it to show.
The last area of scientific misconduct that we're going to discuss is mentorship. Mentoring is really important in the sciences. You often have relationships with advisors, advising large lab groups, postdocs, mentoring undergrads. There's a long tradition of teaching people how to do science through a mentoring relationship. This becomes an area of research misconduct when the mentor is in a position of power over the people within their lab, and they take advantage of those people. Also, when you become a mentee, there's a lot of things that you want to think through so that you're entering into a good relationship.
Okay, so let's think about a question for a second is why would researchers behave unethically? You think in a perfect world, scientists would be motivated, strictly to advance science, but we do see problems, and why might this happen? Well, the basic reason is that they're under pressure for different reasons. The first reason is that there is a strong need to publish. We mentioned earlier that how many publications you have determines your chances for tenure and promotion. It affects your grant funding, which a lot of researchers are, if you're at a university, you're a 9-month faculty probably, and that means that university pays for 9 months of your salary, but if you want to be paid during the summer, you have to provide that money for yourself, and that comes from grants. There's also, you might want to get publicity for your research, or you might want to have results that you would speak at conferences. But this all ties into, probably the big ones are publish, you've probably heard the phrase publish or perish, and the need to get grant money. And so this comes back, and researchers feel a real need to have data that works out, that tells a story, that supports their hypothesis. And it can be very stressful if your data isn't working out. And there is the pressure that if you just change a few points perhaps, that everything works out.
So now we just want to discuss some recent examples of scientific misconduct that come from real literature. So these are actual articles that were published and then retracted. So articles can be published in a journal and then taken back, and it's very embarrassing for the researchers involved in this process. It's a really bad mark on your record. If you search in a lot of databases for the word retracted, you will find these articles. The ones that we're going to discuss here are from Science Direct.
And for the most case, they are retracted due to ethical problems, but there are the occasional cases where the authors can actually retract. And if, for example, something went wrong with their data and they discovered it after publication, it is possible to go, and there's an explanation given for each retraction.
So in this case, this article was retracted because there was unauthorized use of the published material. It had been published before, so a case of almost self-plagiarism, but they didn't ask the co-author if they could republish their work. They try to put it tactfully here as a miscommunication between the lead author. You can see the lead author here is Dr. Lee. The article was already previously published by Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Hanna in Construction Industry Institute report in February 2001, and previously published material from that report was published again in this 2009 article by Dr. Lee. They cite it as a miscommunication between the way they shared things, but the co-authors said that they did not participate in the preparation or production of this article.
All right, so this example is an article that was retracted due to the authors republishing basically a good chunk of their paper that they'd already published in another journal. And you can see it plagiarized large parts of a paper that had already appeared in probably ecological indices. And when you submit a paper, as the editors go on to explain, is that you actually verify, you sign a document that says that this paper that you're submitting is original, and it has never appeared in any form in another publication previously. And it's possible, so this is a case of self-plagiarism, and it's possible to plagiarize yourself. And when you're writing a paper and you want to use material that you've published in a previous article, what you do is you cite yourself. And you can see here that they say appropriately cited. So it's perfectly fine to say, in our previous article, Gonzalez et al., say this, and that's the way you cite yourself. And I like this because the editors go on to explain why this is so unethical, and they apologize that this was not detected during the submission process.
So in the fields of engineering and in some scientific fields, some information is proprietary and owned by a company or an organization. It's different than other academic fields in that way. So sometimes there are horizon dates set on when you can release information to the public. In this case, the author of this article released some of that proprietary information that should not have been published publicly. And so this article had to be retracted due to that ethical breach.
All right, so now we're going to discuss the 5 different types of plagiarism.
So stealing is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically when you directly take the words of someone else without citing, without quoting, and without giving them credit. This is what we think of most of the time when we think of plagiarism, the basic cutting and pasting it into another document and claiming it as your own.
So in this example, we have Mary, and she's writing a paper, and she's reading it. She wants to cite some statements that were written by an author that was in a paper that was very difficult for her to understand. And so she tries to write it, but it doesn't work out. And she realizes that really the author that she wants to cite, she just wrote it so much better than she ever could. So she cuts and pastes the text into her Word document. But unfortunately, she just cuts and pastes, and she doesn't give the proper citation or put the text in quotes, which is what she should have done. So her professor, when she's grading it, easily spots this foreign text because it sounds different than how Mary writes, and fails her for plagiarism.
The next type of plagiarism is misquoting. Misquoting is when you change a word or a few words, even though you're quoting and citing the author. This changes the intent of the author's speech. You always have to make sure that you're correctly representing what the author intended and that you're not changing words to either strengthen your argument or make a point. You also have to be careful of misquoting even when you elide words or when you're inserting words in brackets. You want to make sure that you're representing the original intent of the author.
So let's look at Tom, and he's writing a persuasive essay. So he's trying to convince the reader of his opinion. It's about a controversial topic, and he wants to make his argument even more convincing and stronger. Unfortunately, while he's doing his research, he can't find exactly the right quote, but he does find one where the author talks about tries to make his point, but using language like perhaps and suggests, so it's not really as strong as what he'd want. He knows that if he took out these words, that the author's sentence would be even stronger, and that would strengthen his argument, make it more convincing. But unfortunately, the professor is familiar with this author's research and knows that the statement wasn't as strong as what Tom has portrayed it in his paper.
Another type of plagiarism is insufficient paraphrasing. This is when a student tries to summarize the information that they've learned, but they don't do quite a good enough job of putting it in their own words. So they haven't really analyzed and interpreted that information and processed it in a way that puts it into their own dialogue. Oftentimes, insufficient paraphrasing involves writing almost exactly what the original author wrote, but not quoting it. So you might be citing it, but still not quoting the exact words that that author wrote.
Okay, so in this example, we have Sandra, and she's reading a paper in Nature by Grotzinger and Rothman, and she's trying to include the information in her paper, but she's having trouble probably understanding. It's fairly technical, and so instead of doing what she should have to avoid plagiarism by putting the author's words in quotations, she tries to paraphrase it, and she gives a citation, Grotzinger Rothman, And she says, call into question the assumption that organisms play an essential role in determining stromatolite morphology during the early Precambrian. Well, this sounds good, except if you look back at the original text, you see that there are words that she basically just lifted. Necessarily played an essential role in determining stromatolite morphology. And you see that it basically says here. And so this is too close to what the original text was, and this would be considered plagiarism.
Another type of plagiarism is duplication of publication, otherwise known as self-plagiarism. We saw an example of this in the retractions that we looked at earlier. Basically, you cannot duplicate publication or submit the same paper twice without permission. So sometimes in the scientific community, if you present a paper at a conference, it might have a non-exclusive publication agreement. And so you may be allowed to publish that again in a journal, but you have to be very careful about that. You want to make sure that you're representing new ideas, that your publications are unique publications, that you're not just recycling the same paper over and over again. This also happens in classes. You cannot submit a paper that you've written for a previous class in a new class. If there is a paper that fits exactly with the ideas presented in the new class, you need to discuss things with your professor and make sure that you're not just recycling what you've done, that you're learning something new, that you're integrating new concepts. The purpose of writing papers isn't just to have the paper done. The purpose is to really integrate the new knowledge from that current course into what you're doing.
So the last type of plagiarism that we're going to discuss is patch writing. And patch writing is sort of an interesting case in that it's a hybrid really between stealing and insufficient paraphrasing. Patch writing is when you take phrases and sentences from perhaps a source or several different sources and you don't provide citations. And so you take a phrase here and a clause here and you put it all together, and so it's a mishmash, but it's plagiarism because it's not your own writing and you're not providing citations.
So common mistakes that you could make when plagiarizing. Right now, it's very common for people to cut and paste from online sources without using quotes or a citation. This becomes very easy to do. Students are trying to take notes as they piece together information across the internet. Maybe they're cutting and pasting into a Word document and you forget to always properly cite where you got that information from. It's almost too easy to do.
Another common mistake is that not citing data or information that you get from a non-textual source, such as a chart or a graph or an image in a paper. So it's possible to plagiarize information that is contained in a graphical form, not just text.
And it's not just true of pictorial images. There's other non-textual material, things like computer codes. One of the most common forms of plagiarism in computer science is copying codes and copying programs. You can also plagiarize equations if you don't cite the original source.
So how do you avoid plagiarism? Well, the easy way is if there's any doubt at all, be sure to cite it. If it's text, put it in quotation marks, and if it's either a text or image, give the citation, give credit to the original author. As long as you give the citation and put it in quotes, you can't get in trouble.
There are several programs that can help make citing easier, and these are very important not just for the sciences, but for all academic libraries. Programs like RefWorks, EndNoteWeb, Zotero are citation management systems that help you generate bibliographies, keep track of all the articles that you've read and worked with throughout putting together a paper or a dissertation, and have some pretty nifty features.
So we have some case studies that we've posted on the discussion board, and we'd like the class to read the case studies, and let's have a discussion about the ethical issues that are involved in each example. And let's explore it from the areas of scientific misconduct that we've talked about, and we'd really like everyone to participate.
We also want you to engage in some interactive media that's designed for STEM audiences. Research ethics in STEM and responsible conduct of research have become very important issues, especially with the passage of the U.S. Competes Act. And so ethics training is very important in the sciences. Libraries and science libraries have gotten very much involved in the process of ethics training. And so several interactive media programs have been developed around this. For this class, we want you to choose between either playing a game, which was developed by an NSF grant. It's a project that I was personally involved in. There's 3 levels of the NSF Gaming Against Plagiarism game that you can play through. Another interactive media that we'd like you to look into is a video from the Office of Research Integrity. You watch short video clips and make decisions for the actors within the clips, and then you'll see the movie as it progresses based on the decisions you've made. Both of these activities will take a minimum of 45 minutes. So budget your time and choose one or the other to kind of explore.